Going through my 20s, I'd say one of the biggest challenges I've had is trying to understand outside of the 9 till 5 what business adventure do I want to pursue. I think certainly in light of events like COVID, it's really brought home and to the forefront just the range of different opportunities that there are to pursue online, whether it's YouTube automation, whether it's drop shipping, whether it's crypto, whether it's Amazon FBAs. There's so many different options available within the market. And I think one of the difficulties is trying to pin down and actually commit to a strategy longer term without falling into the normal trap of paralysis by analysis, which I know a lot of people do fall into. I guess from my point of view, I naturally fell into property. And I guess the purpose of today's video, particularly for those of you who want to pursue property in more detail, is really understanding, first and foremost, how do you develop a brand? And what are the various points of consideration to take into account when developing a brand? And that's what I'll cover off within this video. So let's get to it. Now, ultimately, when it comes to pursuing any business adventure, I think the difficulty most people fall into is actually deciding what they want to do. There's so many different options out there online as to how to make money, whether it's YouTube automation, whether it's drop shipping, whether it's any client-related services. So James Smith is kind of a perfect example of this. The trap most people fall into is not doing anything because they don't commit to pursuing a certain goal. Now, the first point in setting up any business is deciding on a brand name. And ultimately, the key here is to really think about, how do I decide on a brand name that captures what my business does and what services it offers? So, by way of example, this YouTube channel represents a service that I offer, which is ultimately educating people who are new to property on how to get into property as a step-by-step process and all of the points of consideration to take into account. So if you think about my brand name on YouTube, it is Lucrative Property Education. I want people to expand their wealth within property, and my service is providing an educational platform to achieve that. Now, I will go on to checking URL availability when it comes to developing a brand name, but I think before I go any further, a key point I do want to raise when it comes to developing the brand for your business is that a trap most people fall into is they will almost hide behind their brand's name as a shield. Now, why that's really problematic within property is that all of the trust, the credibility, the confidence, the relationship building that we build with the clients we work with ultimately comes from us. It doesn't come from the brand name. The brand name simply represents the service that we offer. And I think where this is quite telling, if you look at most big corporations in today's world, this is the reason why they're onboarding influencers to help sell the brand, because it adds more personality to the brand rather than it just being a rigid logo or a rigid representation of what the business has to offer. So a perfect example of this when it comes to big name corporations is Nike. Nike will oftentimes employ athletes to help sell the brand, and this is what we call brand marketing. So taking the example of Nike moving forward into our business as property investors, another point to take into account is that as a company, we can have multiple brands. So if I use my service as an example on YouTube, my brand name is Lucrative Property Education because the service that I'm providing is educational based. Whereas if I'm dealing with a different set of stakeholders, such for example, the clients that I work with, investors in property, I may tweak the brand name to Lucrative Property Acquisition because the service I'm offering is related to the buying and selling of properties. And that's a key point to remember when it comes to developing a company. A company can have multiple brand names. It really just depends on the scope of services you want to offer, how those services are defined, and ultimately how those services are represented in the various brands that you offer to your stakeholders. And that can range from viewership to clients to investors. But ultimately, the key in all of this, regardless of how many different brands you have for your business, particularly within property, is not to hide behind the brand as a shield. Ultimately, the integrity and the trust you have with investors, you have within clients, ultimately comes from you as the owner of the business. It does not come from the brand. And that's a key point to consider when it comes to developing a brand for the business, not just in the initial stages of developing the business, but also longer term when it comes to developing and acquiring more deals. Now, when it comes to having multiple brands related to a business, a key point to remember is that the brand names don't necessarily have to be related to the company name. Brilliant if it does, but it's not essential. Ultimately, the brand names, as mentioned earlier, simply represent the service that you offer. And as a business, you may offer more than one service. The company name is really just for tax purposes, so submitting your end of year accounts. But again, for clarification, it doesn't need to be linked in any way to the brand name. So a perfect example of this is BlackRock. BlackRock are a company, but underneath BlackRock, they have ownership and shares within multiple companies across multiple industries. BlackRock is simply an overriding name for a company that encompasses a multiple portfolio of different brands. Okay, so the next stage in developing the brand name is ultimately checking if you have URL availability online. Now, for most online services, you will want to probably develop your own website if you're not already using YouTube or Facebook or any other forms of social media. Now, I guess to clarify, as a business, you don't need a website, but of course it's recommended if you want to advertise your services. Now, the best website I would recommend for this is GoDaddy. So on GoDaddy, you can enter your URL name, and it will basically check if that URL has already been taken by somebody else. If it hasn't, then you can simply purchase the URL from GoDaddy, and then you have your brand's name there and then. Now, of course, this is quite an important check, as you don't want to potentially take a brand name that somebody else already has. Okay, I hope you guys found that video useful and insightful. As always, do hit the subscribe button. If you do have any comments or queries, again, just post them down in the comments below. And until then, see you guys next time.